people's expectations are, you know, that you're going to be a model kid, you know, you're going to get straight A's and you're going to, you know, grow up, have, you know, all be happy and everything. And a lot of my friends, you know, are really different looking and they're probably not what their parents expected of them.
Trying to be an individual, because you see a lot of people who dress exactly the same and they do all the same things.
Understanding that when I did get into something I thought I wanted to do, and that when I didn't want to always carry through with it all the way, that they just couldn't let me do that. They had to, you know, push me into keep on doing whatever I started doing. Like if I started playing football, you know, when I was 8 years old and did that season, that, you know, I should keep playing even if I didn't like it.
I mean, I get good grades and they expect that, and so when I bring home good grades, I mean, they don't compliment me and they just blow it off.
But I've never been able to spend a lot of time with my father. He lives in another state. And I don't know if he knows how to relate to his children. When I lived with him for 8 months, he didn't know how to talk to me. I'm a girl. He knows how to talk to my brother, but he doesn't know how to talk to me because I'm a girl.
I mean, right now, I'm in a way, I'm kind of scared to get married because of what happened to my parents. I don't know if it'll happen to me. I mean, if I find the perfect girl, then I get married to her. And then all of a sudden we get a divorce and we already have kids and everything. I don't want to put my kids through the same thing that my parents have put me through, because it's really hard.
Ask a dozen parents for a verb to describe adolescence, and chances are most of their descriptions will be a variation on the word change. Body, mind, spirit, emotions, all are in flux during adolescence, and all in the context of a rapidly changing social environment. For the kid and his parents, that means, well, let's talk with Kevin Huggins about what that means. Kevin, would you say that it's more difficult to be an adolescent now than it was then?
In many ways, I believe it is. Some of it's because of the fact that adolescence is so much longer. Some of it is because there is more of a discrepancy between the time the physiological changes occur and the intellectual changes. Researchers have found that kids are not developing their formal operations of their adult thinking capacities until much later.
And go with that for just a moment. What is a formal operation?
Well, that's a word that Piaget used to describe. He's a Swiss psychologist who did a lot of research in how people learn to think using their adult thinking capacities. And he discovered that there really is a fundamental difference between the way children think and the way adults think. And he found that it's during adolescence that people acquire their adult thinking capacities, the ability to be able to look at things and evaluate them from a much more objective viewpoint, an ability to think beyond just their own concrete experiences, to be able to think through concepts and ideas and to even think about themselves more. Those formal operations in years past tended to develop along with the 3-year growth spurt of puberty. But they're finding now that kids are postponing developing these formal operations until they get into college. And sometimes they don't develop them at all, which means then we have a 10 or 12-year period of time where we have people with adult bodies still operating with childlike minds. That's a dangerous position to put kids in. And then bombard them with adult information like no generation of kids have ever been exposed to. And you've got really the recipe for disaster.
Some of the symptoms of that are obvious. We see drug abuse, we see teenage pregnancy, we see suicide. What are some of the less obvious outcomes of that discrepancy in growth and intellectual development?
Well, as kids are moving into adolescence, as their bodies begin to look more like adults, there are all kinds of new expectations put on them. New expectations for how they're supposed to think now like adults. They're supposed to look like adults. They're supposed to relate like adults. And kids are still having to cope with all these new expectations with childlike thinking. And as a result, they just have no idea of what to do with all these incredible expectations and this growing sense of, I don't have what it takes. I don't have what the world requires of me. You know, there's, in working with kids, I have found that about a third of the kids I work with, when they're in trouble and they're feeling pain, they hold it in, they stuff it.
I'd say that is true. When I haven't dealt with my feelings, they do come out in different places. If for some reason I've had problems with Mom and Dad, a lot of times that anger and frustration is taken out on my little sister, which is unfair to her. But those feelings at times have to come out or you're going to explode, and a lot of times they just come out on who's ever closest to you at that time.
Another third of the kids I work with, when they're in pain, they speak out. They tell everybody about it.
To have them listen to me, so that if I was saying something that's really important to me, to have them at least acknowledge that they heard what I was saying, even if they didn't agree with it. I at least wanted to hear them say, okay, this is what we hear you saying, and then if there's any disagreement beyond that, at least I know that I've been heard.
And another third of the kids that I work with, when they're in pain, they don't say anything, but they act out through their actions. They tell people they're in pain.
I cut off all my hair, I bleached it all white, I shaved one whole side of my head. I looked really bad. I was wearing all black all the time and running off places where they didn't want me to be, like clubs where that they thought was a bad influence, hanging out with people that they thought were a bad influence.
Of those three groups, which group do you think that parents are most comfortable with? Of course, they're most comfortable with the group that holds it in. And yet, research has shown that that's the group of kids who will have the most psychological problems as adults. And you ask parents which group that they're most uncomfortable with, they're most uncomfortable with the group that speaks out and starts to say, hey, I'm hurting, I'm going to complain about my circumstances. That's the group they're most uncomfortable with, but that's the group that will probably be the most well-adjusted as adults.
Where's the church fit in that?
Well, the church is a course, in kids' eyes, perceived as an adult-dominated structure.
I'm having a hard time with my church just because I don't like the people that go there, and I feel that some of the people, I feel that they're trying to brainwash me. And this is right and this is right, and you can't do any different.
There are too many, it seems to be there are too many roles in religion, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And if you don't do this, then this is going to happen.
And many kids, they equate adult structure with just more pressure, with more expectation. They equate adult structure with a place where I'm made to feel not so good about myself. So most kids, by the time they move into mid to late adolescence, they want to avoid anywhere where there's just going to be more pressure, more bad feelings about themselves.
You described kids as attempting a lot of things to get relief before they go to their parents or to clergy or counselors. A lot of us write off those kinds of things as kids attracted to a pleasure principle. They're losing themselves in something that makes them feel good. I get the feeling that that's not what you see happening here.
No, it's not just, it's not as simple as kids just wanting to feel good. Most kids are not motivated by what will bring them pleasure. Most kids are motivated by what will get them out of pain.
One of the things I do to escape pain is I'd go to parties and get drunk, drink whatever they had, hard liquor to beer to all that stuff. And then I would if they had the pot, I would smoke the pot. And if they had China White there, I would use China White and Snow and all that other stuff.
See, kids tend to learn these addictions from watching how their parents deal with pain and imitating.
What do you think kids see, by and large, when they look at the world?
As kids move into adolescence, we mentioned these formal operations are available. Most kids don't use them to any consistent degree until late adolescence, college years. But they use them sporadically, starting at puberty and on. And as they start to use these more advanced ways of looking at the world, they start to notice new things about their past.
growing up, I have started to see some of the different aspects of my family. Who played what role, what my mom did along the years that I thought was fine. As I'm getting older, I'm realizing that she could have either done something different, or she should have, or, why didn't she? I'm realizing more of my, things about my father, just the different people in my family. And I'm starting to, I have the feelings of, why wasn't my mother more supportive? And, why didn't she work harder? Are starting to build up. I've had to deal with them as I've realized them. As a kid, all the things that I ever saw happening, I thought were normal. I never knew any different.
They have new insight into the future. They can begin now to imagine the consequences of actions and the consequences of certain things. They begin to develop new insight into problems. Why problems develop. Why Dad drinks. Why Mom is always unhappy. Why it is that they're unpopular at school. And they also develop new insight into the solutions to those things. They have real creative ways of coming up with solutions. One girl recently who was released from a drug rehab center was being interviewed, and they asked her, what could your parents have done to help you avoid from being addicted to drugs? And her response was, well, I think if there was a law that required parents and teens to sit down together for an hour every night, I would have never become dependent on drugs. Well, there she is, a new insight into a solution. She's using her creative ability to be able to solve problems. But very often, as kids come up with solutions, the world isn't very anxious to listen to them. And this particular girl came home and told her parents this, and they said, well, we're busy. I don't know if we'll have time to do that. Imagine how that makes the world so much more a frustrating place to kids.
I realized that I had a lot of friends that I could go to and talk to through support groups and through school. But why couldn't I go to my parents?
They develop new insight into themselves and new insight into other people, what other people are thinking and feeling. Now they can read in ways they never could as a child. Now, with all this new insight coming, it's like putting on a pair of glasses that you never had before. And now you begin to see how much more dangerous and lonely this place is that you live in. And for the first time, you've got to cope with all these new perceptions. What do you do?
But tell me that you're not talking about Christian people here.
Oh, absolutely. Christian kids as well. In fact, Christian kids can sometimes be even more unhealthy because as they perceive all these new things, they're not allowed to talk about it. They're not allowed to talk about all the troubling emotions around them. I was recently listening to a woman therapist who works with bulimic young women. And she mentioned that she became a Christian, and the very person that led her to Christ was the same person who taught her how to throw up. And she was talking about the things in Christian culture that encouraged her to binge and purge. And one of the main things was that she felt like because of these Christian rules, that certain emotions are not Christian emotions to have, that she was never able to share her feelings. She had all kinds of feelings during adolescence, but because she was in a Christian environment, she wasn't allowed to express them. You're not allowed to be angry as a Christian. You're not allowed to admit fear. You're not allowed to admit anger. You're not allowed to admit shame. All that stuff you hide. And as you hide all that stuff, then you deprive yourself help to coping with it.
We've looked at the macro, what kids see when they look at the world. Let's bring it in tight now. What do most kids seem to see when they look in the mirror?
I think an early adolescent will tend to, as he looks in the mirror, see a whole lot more positive things. But the longer he is during adolescence, the more he's going to tend, as he looks in the mirror, or she looks in the mirror, they're going to see somebody that's deficient. They're going to look in the mirror and see someone that's deficient physically. It's been shown that kids 95% of grade school children, when interviewed, are satisfied with their bodies. But 95% of high school kids, when interviewed, hate their bodies.
I don't have the muscular ability that I want, the muscle tone that I need, and acne doesn't help you anyway, except for people that like you for your body and just your body aren't really people because they should like you for who you are and what you are.
As they look in the mirror, they also see someone that's deficient mentally. Most kids I work with secretly think of themselves as being dumb, stupid. Now, I found in working with kids, one of the highest compliments that you can pay a kid is to tell them they have a good mind. That often brings tears to kids' eyes.
As a kid, I had a real hard time learning. Some of it came from my family background, and, we moved around a lot, and I never had time to concentrate. And as I grew up, I always felt that I was not as smart as everybody else.
They also look in the mirror and they see someone who probably doesn't have what it takes to be a real man or a real woman, someone who's sexually deficient as well, because perhaps they've had early dating experiences and they haven't been able to pull them off. They felt like they have failed to keep a guy's interest or a girl's interest.
As far as relationships are concerned, I feel pretty unsuccessful. Because I guess more than anything, I feel like I take more than I give. But then I also want them to be able to tell me that I'm taking too much. And I don't know if that's how I honest to God feel, or if that's the way I justify taking as much as I take.
As a kid goes through adolescence, his image in the mirror becomes more and more deficient to him, to the point where he begins to think, I have to be somebody absolutely different than who I really am if I'm ever going to make it in this world. I really have to hide who I am. Kids learn to live a pretense then.
Talk to us about what kids need in order to weather their adolescence.
I believe kids, in order to weather adolescence, need adult intervention. And that's not to say that a few kids won't make it without adult intervention. By God's grace, some kids will. But even the kids that make it without much help from their parents, normally you'll find there's been another key adult in their life, either from church or school, that's made up the difference in a lot of ways.
And how can parents help in that beyond the obvious?
Well, it's a very understandable response that when parents see their kids going through all these changes, physically, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, that the parent is going to feel out of control. My kid is becoming someone I have no control over, and that's true. And the first thing that parents need to know if they're going to help their kids during this time is don't panic and let their fears control them. When parents panic and let their fears control them, they almost always launch off on some new strategy to regain control. And that drives their kids usually farther from them. The kid just deems that parent less and less safe. So the first rule for parents is don't panic and let your fears control you. Admit your fears. It's okay to be afraid, but it's not okay to let those fears control you. The second thing I would suggest to parents is that they take some time to enter their kid's world and understand what he's experiencing. And they can do that by talking with their adolescent, or they can do it by talking to other adolescents if their adolescent won't talk with them. They can possibly do it by going to activities, sharing activities with their kids. But it takes some time, some quality time, to be able to enter your kid's world and begin to understand what they're experiencing. And as they do, I would say, they're going to be ready then to provide direction for their kids. This is the third key. Provide direction according to their need at the moment. That's the Ephesians 4:29 principle.
The first time that I had sex, I think I did it because I wanted the attention. And I was way too young. I was in the 7th grade. And as much as I would like to take that back and to say that never happened, I can't. And I did it because I wanted a man's attention. And because I was never given that as a child. I needed that the most.